Coming up on Arirang News, experts warn South Korea could be facing a second wave of the coronavirus pandemic. The number of cases has been stubbornly high lately, and the government is ready to reinstate strict social distancing if necessary. President Moon Jae-in calls for stern measures to stop financial crime, especially at a time like this when people face hardship from the pandemic. He also calls on Parliament to cooperate in setting up an agency to fight corruption. And South Korea's exports were down in the first 20 days of this month by 7.5% on year. Petrochemicals and cars hit hard, but there were some bright spots like semiconductors. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. A story breaking just this afternoon, the South Korean military has confirmed that North Korea is reinstalling propaganda speakers in several locations along the inter-Korean border. This is the North's latest move since it threatened a series of actions to nullify the inter-Korean comprehensive military agreement. The North blew up the inter-Korean liaison office in Kaesong last week in anger over anti-Pyongyang leaflets sent across the border by South Korean activists. Now, South Korea's Unification Ministry has urged North Korea to immediately call off its plan to start sending propaganda leaflets of its own over the border, saying such an action would not help inter-Korean relations. This was in a press briefing this morning after the North's state media reported that the regime plans to send some 12 million leaflets across on 3,000 balloons as retaliation for the leaflets sent over the border by defectors in the South. As for the leaflets sent out by the defectors, the Unification Ministry said Seoul is making efforts to stop them. Experts in South Korea say the country could be hit at any time by a second wave of COVID-19, and one could be spreading at this very moment. The city of Seoul is looking at going back to strict social distancing. Choi Jung-yoon reports.
South Korea has reported more than 300 cases of COVID-19 over the past week, and health authorities are gearing up to prepare for a possible second wave. Although only 17 cases were reported on Monday, the Central Disease Control Headquarters says the country is in the middle of a second wave of the pandemic. According to the authorities, the first wave broke out in March and April, followed by a sharp decline in numbers. But COVID-19 is on the rise again with several cluster infections which started during the long vacation period in May.
It's hard to say a specific standard to call things an outbreak, but as community-based transmissions are occurring fast and repetitively, we expect a second wave. So we're preparing for a long fight, and we're coming up with countermeasures for autumn and winter when the situation could worsen.
To prevent the medical system from collapsing, the city of Seoul announced that it would go back to strict social distancing if the number of newly confirmed cases in the city exceeds 30 for 3 consecutive days, or the rate of intensive care beds in use reaches 70%. So far as of Monday, some 53% of a total of 913 beds are in use. Seoul will also strengthen preemptive testing and plan to work with other local governments to secure enough medical care. The mayor of Seoul says the number of newly confirmed COVID-19 cases in the country could reach 800 a day by mid-July. From the end of April to mid-June, the average number of people infected by one patient has risen dramatically to 1.79. It had been as low as 0.5 before the series of cluster infections in May. Choi Jung-yoon, Arirang News.
South Korea's college entrance exam is a test famously that many students have been preparing for since kindergarten. So it's important for parents and high school students to hear about updates as soon as they happen. Well, the pandemic has made that harder. So one private academy has come up with an imaginative way to keep them informed. Choi Won-jong reports.
You might assume this, a drive-in movie theater of sorts, but it's not. Instead, it's more than 3,000 parents and high school seniors gathered in a parking lot for a briefing on college admissions. In order to prevent the spread of COVID-19, one of South Korea's biggest cram schools held a drive-in college entrance briefing. It's set inside cars parked apart from each other. Parents and students receive school brochures that include the cram school's analysis on college admissions. While looking at the large screen set up in the front, through their car radio, they hear,
자, 27페이지. 올해 그 고등학교 3학년 학생들은 개학도 연기되었고.
Due to the sheer amount of information that had to be explained, the CEO of a cram school said they had no choice but to hold the briefing offline.
Timing is important for college admissions. Through this briefing, we can share information we couldn't explain online. We also check a person's body temperature if they get out of their vehicles.
South Korea's college entrance examination was originally scheduled for November 19th, but due to the COVID-19 outbreak, it will now be held on December 3rd. 최원정, 아리랑 뉴스.
To mark the upcoming 70th anniversary of the start of the Korean War, an internationally recognized South Korean artist has created a huge work of art in Seoul's Gwanghwamun Square. It commemorates one of the most tragic times in Korean history, but it also offers hope for a brighter future. Kim Sung-min reports.
This huge art installation in the very heart of Seoul is packed with symbolic meaning. Gwanghwamun Arirang, an 8-meter-tall piece of public art, was installed here to commemorate the Korean War.
In this piece, the artist Kang Ik-jung wanted to commemorate fallen war heroes as well as depict children's dreams about the future and his hope for Korea's unification.
The top half rotates 90 degrees clockwise every 70 seconds to mark the 70th anniversary of the war. This also symbolizes the passage of time from past to present and into the future.
But I like to remember the war as a kind of healing point. I like to use the war as a kind of vaccine. So that you can heal this country's really, really sad and then, painful memory.
At a glance, the art might seem at odds with one of the darkest times in Korea's history. Kang used bright colors to represent the bright future and symbols that could bring people together.
So we use 5 different colors, 오방색, and then also children's drawing, and then Arirang, the symbol of our country. So kind of combination of hope and then healing the dark past Korean War.
The Korean letter blocks are the lyrics of Korean folk song Arirang, and in the middle are the drawings of children from Korea and the 22 UN nations that participated in the Korean War. Wrapped around them are the names of the 175,801 fallen heroes.
It's more meaningful because at the first sight you think it's just children drawings, but now it's like a very important impact on the history of Korea. So yeah, it's more meaningful now.
Visitors to Gwanghwamun Square can enjoy the artwork while commemorating the events of 70 years ago. Gwanghwamun Arirang will be on display until June 30th. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in has called for stern measures to eradicate financial crime, especially now with the difficulties people already face due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Here's the president.
코로나 극복을 위해 매우 시적절한 의제라고 생각합니다. 경제가 어려워질수록 민생 침해 범죄와 사행성 범죄가 증가할 수 있습니다. 초기부터 강력하게 대응해 주기 바랍니다.
He was speaking today at the Anti-Corruption Policy Consultative Council. President Moon said that as Korea moves toward a digital economy, it's important to root out unfair transactions online, such as loan sharking, voice phishing, and online gambling. And regarding the government's plan to create a special agency tasked with investigating corruption among high-ranking government officials by next month, Moon called on Parliament to get to work and elect an official to lead the envisioned agency. South Korea's exports fell during the first 20 days of June due to the pandemic. The Korea Customs Service says total exports in that period came to around $25 billion, down 7.5% from a year earlier. Average exports per day were down even more, 16%. Shipments of petroleum goods plummeted more than 40%, and auto exports more than 36%. It wasn't all doom and gloom, though. Ship exports jumped by 35%, and semiconductors edged up more than 2%. By region, shipments to the U.S. were down 10%, while those to China rose by more than 14%. Time now for an in-depth look at the market news on this Monday, and for that I'm joined on the line by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, Professor of Economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Professor Yang, thank you for coming on today.
Happy to be here.
Well, stocks on Wall Street ended last week mixed. Some signs of improvement in the economy, but on the other hand, concerns over a second wave of the pandemic. Take us through the global markets.
Okay, well, the global market for the most part seemed to be in sort of a holding pattern, waiting for something to happen, whether something good or something bad. But most of the major countries' indices rose or fell slightly. There wasn't anything that was really very strong in terms of trends. Now, the United States, the Dow and S&P were slightly down at the end of the week. NASDAQ was slightly up. But if you look at the United States, the coronavirus is on the whole going up. It is rising fairly rapidly in 20 states. The global cases of coronavirus is also reaching a very high level. So there are still continuing nervousness about the coronavirus. And then the United States unemployment insurance, the government, the Congress had increased their funding during March at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis in the United States, but that is running out in July. So the unemployment insurance as well as aid to various state governments and various programs, they may run out of funding in July, and they're not quite sure whether the Congress will be able to reinstate these programs. There are some opposition by some congressmen. So there's question on whether such active fiscal policy will be continued, and that, I think, is playing into this wait-and-see attitude. The same wait-and-see attitude we see in European stock markets. FTSE and Euro 20, they were up during the end of last week. That probably reflects recovering EU economy, but still not anything really outstanding. Hong Kong and Shanghai, after rising at the end of last week, it fell slightly today. Nikkei fell a bit slightly today. Again, holding pattern. KOSPI and KOSDAQ. KOSPI fell slightly today, minus 0.68%. KOSDAQ rose 1.3%. But still, again, like the other countries, it seems to be in a holding pattern.
Well, now we just heard that Korea's exports in the first 20 days of June were down from a year earlier by 7%, but you could say it's even lower when you take into account the number of working days during that period. What do you make of these figures, Professor Yang?
Yeah, in terms of working days, exports actually fell by 16.2%, which is a very significant loss. But I think it's also significant that imports fell by 12.0%. Now, the recovery, at least on the domestic side, depends on how well the domestic consumption is revived. And sometimes import demand is used as a quick proxy to see what the domestic demand will be. And the fact that the imports fell by 12%, though some of that is probably because the price of crude oil that Korea imports fell. But the 12.0% fall in imports does seem to signal that Korean domestic demand will not be that strong either, and that means the Korean recovery might take longer than it was hoped. Now, on the export side, the automobiles fell by 36.7%. Petrochemicals fell by 40.9%. These are very significant. Automobile exports are Korea's second largest exports, and the fact that it is falling so quickly and so much means that on manufacturing we're going to see some significant problems unless the global economy recovers very quickly. Petrochemicals, minus 40.9%. That is partially due to prices, partially due to volume. And again, it'll be a significant hit for Korean manufacturing industries. As far as the countries are involved, exports to China did go up because they were obviously recovered from coronavirus, though they were having some problems in Beijing. So perhaps next few days, we'll see the exports to China maybe take a hit. But most of the other major regions for Korean exports, the United States, European Union, Vietnam, Japan, and Middle East, they mostly took double-digit hits from compared to last June. So the global economy still seems to be in the midst of very significant recession. One perhaps tiny good news is that trade surplus recovered to plus 494 million. Usually having a trade surplus or trade deficit for a month or two doesn't really matter, but here I think it is significant because if we continue to have a trade deficit, because the global financial market is in such a nervous state, having a trade deficit may hurt Korea's foreign investors' confidence in Korea, but the fact that we got back into a surplus, I think will help foreign investors' confidence in Korea a lot.
All right, Professor Young, we're almost out of time, but real quick, what's coming up this week?
Okay, well, I think there are some statistics coming up, but I think the most interesting news that will be coming out is Samsung Lee Jae-yong, Vice Chairman, Prosecution Investigation Review Committee meeting. So we may be able to see how strong the government is going to prosecute the Vice Chairman of Samsung Corporation. And then we have the Bank of Korea Monetary Policy Committee meeting. They're probably not going to touch the interest rate, but we want to see what kind of alternate policies that they may come up with, how creative they will be to try to get Korea out of the doldrums.
Got it. All right, Professor Young, always great to have you on. Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
That brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.